The magnolia trees that lined the old brick path outside Willow Creek Assisted Living swayed gently, their broad leaves shimmering in the amber dusk. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, pressing the humid Georgia air with a sense of unease. Jessica Carter walked the garden slowly, her sneakers muffled on the mulch, one hand resting on the lead rope of a tall, striking brown mare named Maple. The horse's coat caught the last gold of the sunset, her intelligent eyes darting with alertness, the whites showing just enough to betray something haunted beneath her calm exterior. Jessica was 28, a new nurse at Willow Creek, and every step she took along that path seemed to amplify the doubts swirling inside her. She had only started 2 weeks ago, eager to make a difference after leaving the chaos of the city hospital. Here, the work was supposed to be quieter, more meaningful. Therapy animals, sunlight, the slow rhythm of elderly lives. But as dusk crept in, the edges of things seemed to blur, and the promise of peace felt fragile. She led Maple through the garden, greeting the few residents who watched from their wheelchairs on the porch, their faces shadowed and unreadable. Maple had become a favorite. Residents loved to brush her, to feed her slices of apple, to press wrinkled hands to the softness of her muzzle. Tonight, though, Maple seemed distracted, ears flicking toward the looming building as if she heard something the humans could not. Jessica tried to calm herself with a deep breath. Just nerves, she told herself. The air was heavy, the sky threatening, and she had always been sensitive to storms. She stroked Maple's neck, feeling the warmth and muscle there, grounding herself. As they approached the side entrance, Jessica paused at room 112, her heart skipping a beat. The door was half open, a pale slice of light spilling across the worn tile. Maple stopped dead in her tracks, muscles tensing, nostrils flaring wide. She let out a sharp, startled snort, and then, with shocking suddenness, reared up, hooves scraping the air just inches from Jessica's shoulder. Jessica stumbled back, heart pounding. "Easy, girl!" She barely managed to keep her voice steady as Maple pawed at the ground, refusing to move forward. The mare's eyes were fixed on the door, ears pinned, breath coming in ragged bursts. Jessica felt a chill slide down her spine. It wasn't just the horse. Something was wrong. She tightened her grip on the lead rope, but Maple planted her feet and snorted again, louder this time, her entire body trembling as if she was about to bolt. Jessica looked up, eyes drawn, against her will, to the half-open door of room 112. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of vision, a shadow darted across the far wall. It moved too quickly to belong to any of the patients, and too low to the ground to be a trick of the light. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" The words barely escaped her lips before they were swallowed by the gathering dark. She strained to listen, but heard only the distant rumble of thunder, the staccato beat of Maple's hooves on the bricks. Something about the room felt icy, unnatural. The air had a taste to it, metallic, bitter, like the memory of a bad dream. Her first instinct was to move on, to tug Maple past the door and get back to the familiar comfort of the barn. But something held her in place. Maple's distress was so vivid, so real, that Jessica found herself hesitating. She'd been trained to trust the therapy animals, to let them guide interactions with patients. But this wasn't in any manual. This was fear, plain and simple, both horse and human caught in the same invisible snare. For a long moment, Jessica stood frozen, her hand tight on Maple's lead, her mind racing. Should she push forward, tell herself it was nothing? Or should she listen to Maple, trust the animal's instincts over her own uneasy logic? The horse's breathing began to slow, and after what felt like an eternity, Maple lowered her head, pressing her soft muzzle gently against Jessica's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it grounded her. Jessica exhaled, forcing herself to focus on Maple, not the darkened doorway. "It's okay," she whispered, stroking the horse's face, feeling the steady rhythm of Maple's breath calm her own. The mare's eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to say, "Pay attention. Something's wrong. Don't ignore it." She stepped back, deciding not to force the horse forward. The light in room 112 flickered, then steadied. Jessica thought she saw movement again. Just a flicker, gone before she could be sure. Her heart hammered in her chest. She was supposed to be the caretaker, the one who brought comfort and safety. But in that moment, it was Maple who steadied her. Maple who insisted on caution. Jessica made a note to check the room chart later. Maybe the resident needed help. Maybe it was just a hallucination, a trick of the failing light, the anxious mind. She turned Maple around and started back toward the barn, her steps slow, deliberate, the weight of unease pressing in with the deepening dusk. As they left the garden, Jessica glanced back over her shoulder. The magnolia branches shook in the wind. Thunder cracked louder than before, and for just an instant, she thought she saw a face at the window of room 112. Pale, watching, gone in a blink. Maple nudged her again, firmer this time, as if to say, "Keep moving." And so they did, the two of them alone against the coming night, bound together by fear, curiosity, and the sense that whatever haunted Willow Creek had only just begun to reveal itself. Willow Creek's days bled into each other with a strange, heavy sameness, but after that night, Jessica could feel the current beneath the calm surface. Every time she passed room 112, a chill crawled up her back. Even the air seemed different, sharp with the scent of rain and old magnolias, and something else she couldn't quite name. Maple felt it too. Over the next several days, the tall mare stopped dead outside the door each time, snorting and pawing the ground, more agitated than before. Once she shook so badly that Jessica could feel the trembling through the lead rope. "It's okay, girl," Jessica murmured, though she was only half convincing herself. The first morning Maple refused. A nurse from the night shift passed by with a tray of medicine cups and gave her a strange look. Jessica tried to smile, but the woman said nothing, just kept walking, eyes flicking toward room 112 like it might bite her. On the third morning, Jessica arrived early, still rattled from a night full of anxious dreams. Shadows in doorways, muffled cries, Maple pacing in the fog outside her window. She found Maple already waiting at the fence, ears pricked, pacing in tight circles. The barn manager, a wiry man with tired eyes named Pete, shook his head when Jessica mentioned room 112. "That horse has more sense than most of us," he muttered, turning away to shovel hay. Jessica tried to brush off the tension, but by lunch, she found herself looking over her shoulder every few minutes. That was when she found the note. It was tucked beneath the strap of her bag in the staff lounge, printed in neat, cold type. "Don't go near the east wing. You're being watched." Jessica froze. The slip of paper pinched between her fingers, heart beating so loudly she was sure someone would hear. She looked up, but the lounge was empty, except for the old TV burbling a midday talk show. Her hands shook as she folded the note, sliding it into her pocket, not sure if she should laugh or panic. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time she drifted off, she heard Maple's cries echoing through the dark, loud, desperate, as if the mare was trying to wake the dead. At one point, she sat up in bed, listening hard. Silence. Then, faintly, the clop of hooves on wet earth. Jessica slipped out of bed, pressed her face to the window. and saw Maple pacing by the side entrance, nostrils flaring as she stared into the darkness. Jessica shivered and crawled back under the covers, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something watched her from the trees. When her alarm rang at 5, she found herself dreading the walk through the garden, dreading room 112 most of all. The air smelled thick, rain-soaked, and the halls were quieter than usual. Nurses speaking in whispers, a patient muttering prayers in the corner. Jessica caught 2 aides huddled near the east wing, their voices hushed. "Special deliveries," one said, glancing around. "Always after hours." "Don't ask," the other replied, fear etched in her face. "Last one who did doesn't work here anymore." Jessica's skin prickled. She wanted to ask what they meant, but when she took a step closer, the conversation stopped dead. The aides turned away, refusing to meet her eyes, and hurried down the hall. Later, as Jessica made her rounds with Maple, she noticed a new lock on the door to the east wing, big and shiny and out of place in a building so old. The supervisor, Mr. Green, a man with too perfect hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, caught her staring. "Everything all right, Nurse Carter?" His voice was smooth, but there was a chill behind it. Jessica hesitated, thinking of the note, the whispers, Maple's strange behavior. Some of the patients have been asking about changes in the East Wing. Extra staff coming and going at night. I wanted to make sure everyone's okay." Mr. Green's expression flickered, just for a second, then hardened. "Curiosity got someone fired here before. You do your job, Nurse Carter, and leave the rest to management. Understand?" He leaned closer, voice dropping. "We're all just trying to keep our heads down." Jessica nodded, her throat tight. As he walked away, Maple sidled up beside her, bumping her gently with her head. Jessica let herself lean against the horse for a moment, feeling the mare's steady presence, the solid reassurance in every breath. "Thank you," she whispered. She'd never felt so alone and so watched at the same time. The rest of the day passed in a blur of medication charts and uneasy silence. At dinner, Jessica found herself picking at her food, distracted by the memory of Maple's pacing. After the meal, she went out to the barn, the sky heavy with rain. She found Maple standing right by the side entrance to the building, head high, muscles tense, tail flicking anxiously. Jessica stroked her mane, whispering soft nonsense words, and the horse relaxed a fraction. "I won't leave you either," she promised. "Whatever's going on, we'll face it together." That night, Jessica wrote down everything she'd seen, the note, the whispers, Maple's odd behavior, in her private journal. She made a promise to herself that she would not turn away, no matter how frightening things became. If Maple wouldn't leave her side, then she would be just as brave. As she drifted to sleep, the last thing she heard was the soft, comforting sound of Maple's breath outside her window, a quiet guardian in the darkness, a reminder that she was not alone. Rain beat a gentle, constant rhythm against the windows at Willow Creek, painting the halls with a muted gray glow. It was early morning, and the world outside was quiet, the usual shuffle and clatter of the residents strangely subdued. The sky was a sheet of pewter, and the smell of damp earth seeped through every crack in the old building. Jessica moved through the corridors in silence, her footsteps echoing. Even the birds seemed to have taken the morning off, leaving only the sound of water tapping the glass and distant thunder grumbling its disapproval. She had barely slept, her mind tangled with worries and memories, her body tense from the strange energy that now permeated the facility. She thought of Maple's agitation, the anonymous note, the whispers about the East Wing. As she walked past room 112, she hesitated. The door was closed, a thin strip of light outlining the frame. Jessica paused, heart quickening, but Maple wasn't with her this time. No gentle nudge or warm breath to help her push through the fear. She moved on, promising herself she'd come back later, when she felt braver. When she reached the barn, she found Maple restless, pacing her stall, the ground churned into mud from anxious hooves. Pete was already there, tossing hay with slow, practiced motions, his eyes meeting Jessica's with a question he didn't speak aloud. Jessica led Maple out into the soft rain for therapy rounds, but the horse kept pausing, glancing back at the barn as if she'd forgotten something important. It was after the rounds, just as the morning staff were shuffling residents back inside for breakfast, that Maple pulled away from Jessica's gentle tug. The mare walked with purpose toward the therapy stable, stopping at the far wall, a section with crumbling mortar and a loose brick near the floor. Maple began to paw at the brick, her movements deliberate. Jessica blinked, surprised, watching as the horse nudged the brick until it wobbled and fell free with a dull thud. Jessica crouched, brushing aside straw and dirt. Behind the brick was a tiny, hollowed space. Inside, dust and a single, small object. She reached in and pulled out a little toy horse, its wooden surface worn smooth by time and anxious fingers. Carved into its belly, barely visible, were 3 initials: JLB. Next to the toy, tangled in spiderwebs, was a small rusted key on a faded blue ribbon. Jessica sat back on her heels, heart pounding, rain pattering on the roof above her. She turned the toy horse over in her hands. It was the kind of thing a child would treasure, maybe a keepsake from a happier time. She looked at the initials again. JLB. The letters nagged at her memory, and she fumbled for her phone, scrolling through the patient roster. There it was. Joanna Lee Brooks, a former patient, listed as transferred 2 years ago. Rumor had it she'd simply vanished. The staff avoided talking about her. Some said she'd been moved to a different facility. Others whispered darker things. Maple pressed her nose into Jessica's shoulder, breathing warm and steady. Jessica stroked the mare's cheek, feeling an ache bloom in her chest, a deep loneliness, raw and familiar. She realized she saw something of herself in Maple's worried eyes, a sense of being lost and searching for answers no one wanted to give. The world inside Willow Creek, with its locked doors and hushed secrets, had begun to feel like a labyrinth. She wondered how long Joanna had wandered these halls, carrying her fears, clinging to a tiny wooden horse. Jessica tucked the toy and the key into her pocket, her fingers lingering on the cool metal. "Thank you, Maple," she whispered. The horse nickered softly in response, her tail swishing. It was as if Maple understood. Maybe she did. Animals always seemed to know when something was wrong, when someone needed help. She spent the rest of the day in a fog, her mind returning over and over to the initials, the toy, and the key. She moved through her tasks mechanically, checking vital signs, administering medications, but her thoughts were always elsewhere. At lunch, she tried to ask one of the older nurses about Joanna Lee Brooks, but the woman's face closed instantly. "Best not to dredge up old ghosts, honey," she muttered, refusing to say more. After her shift, Jessica returned to her tiny apartment above the admin office, the toy horse heavy in her pocket. She sat at her desk, flipping through the facility's old newsletters and patient records. Joanna's name appeared a few times, mostly in mentions of community events or therapy programs. There was nothing about a transfer, nothing about a goodbye. The rain kept falling. Jessica found herself staring at the key, turning it over and over in her hand. It was small, old-fashioned, the kind that might open a forgotten drawer or an ancient padlock. She wondered what it was meant to unlock, and why someone would go to the trouble of hiding it behind a brick. Before bed, she went down to the barn one last time. Maple greeted her with a soft whicker, eyes luminous in the dim light. Jessica pressed her forehead to the horses, closing her eyes. "I promise," she said quietly. "I'll find out what happened. For Joanna, for you." Outside, the storm finally began to break, the first rays of dawn bleeding through the clouds. Jessica felt something shift inside her, a flicker of resolve, fragile but growing. She would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. In a place built on silence, she would not be quiet. Not anymore. That night, after the last of the residents had been tucked into bed and the halls of Willow Creek surrendered to shadows, Jessica sat at her desk, turning the rusted key over and over in her hand. The little wooden horse sat beside her lamp, its painted eyes catching the light, watching her with silent expectation. The day's discoveries circled in her mind, refusing to let her rest. The name, Joanna Lee Brooks, echoed in her memory, paired now with the ache she'd seen in Maple's gaze and the cold in her own chest every time she thought about room 112. She told herself, quietly and again out loud, that she was just curious, just following a hunch. But she knew the truth ran deeper. The secrets at Willow Creek weren't just hidden. They were protected. The rain from earlier had dried up, leaving the air heavy and the night full of the sounds of insects and the distant bark of a fox. Jessica waited until she was certain the night supervisor had disappeared for his smoke break, an hour-long ritual that left the cameras unwatched and the East Wing's lights low. She slipped on her raincoat, tucked the key into her pocket, and made her way down to the therapy barn, her sneakers muffled by the thick, damp grass. The barn was dark except for a single security light at the far end, its pale glow falling across the stalls and the bundles of hay stacked against the back wall. Maple, sensing her approach, gave a low, throaty whicker. Jessica pressed her face to the mare's cheek, the steady breath and living warmth grounding her resolve. She whispered, "Wish me luck," then slipped past Maple's stall and into the tack room. She had passed this small, cluttered space a dozen times, but always found the back door padlocked. Tonight, her hand found the old lock, and the key slipped in with a soft click. The mechanism resisted, rusted by years of neglect, then finally gave way. Jessica paused, listening. No footsteps in the barn, no voices from the garden. She eased the door open and slipped inside. The room was small and stifling, the air thick with the scent of leather, liniment, and old hay. Against the far wall, a single rocking chair creaked in the darkness, illuminated by a slice of moonlight slipping through a crack in the boards. There, sitting perfectly still, was an elderly woman. Her hair was snow-white and long, pulled back in a loose braid that fell across a faded bathrobe. She looked up as Jessica entered, her eyes sharp and blue, piercing through the shadows. She held a faded photograph in her hands, a child, maybe 10 years old, standing beside a brown horse that looked heartbreakingly familiar. Jessica's first impulse was to speak, to offer comfort, but the woman's eyes stilled her, carrying an unspoken warning. For a moment, neither moved. Jessica could feel the pulse in her throat, her mind racing. Was this Joanna Lee Brooks? Had she been here all this time? The old woman finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, brittle with the edge of long-held pain. "You're not supposed to be here." The words fell like stones. Jessica swallowed. "I found something that belongs to you," she said quietly, holding out the toy horse. The woman's hand shook as she took it, running her thumb over the worn wood. I thought they'd destroyed it, the woman whispered. She looked at Jessica, studying her face as if searching for something hidden there. What do you want, child? Jessica hesitated, then spoke the truth. Answers. I think you do too, and I want to help, for the people here, for Maple, for you. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint creak of the rocking chair. The woman's gaze softened, the old suspicion flickering into a fragile trust. She gestured for Jessica to sit on a nearby hay bale. They called it the Willow Project, Joanna began, voice trembling with memory and regret. Dr. Quentin Myers. He was a genius, or so they said. Thought he could change memory. Thought he could fix what made us hurt. She shook her head, lips tightening. What he really did was break people in ways nobody could see. Jessica felt her skin prickle. The Willow Project? Joanna nodded. It was supposed to be therapy. Instead, it was experiments, drugs, isolation, taking away what little we had left. They used us, and when someone spoke up, she broke off, eyes shining with unshed tears. They made them disappear. She handed Jessica a small, battered journal, its cover covered in strange, looping code. I wrote it all down, Joanna said. Not that it did much good. But there's one you have to find. Her name's Clara. She's the last. She's still here, but not for long. They'll say she was transferred too. You must find her, before it's too late. Jessica took the journal, her hands trembling. Why me? She asked. Joanna fixed her with a gaze both fierce and kind. Because you listened. Because you paid attention to the horse. Most people walk right by. A noise outside made them both flinch. The scrape of a hoof, Maple's gentle nicker. Joanna smiled, reaching out to stroke the horse's nose through the open door. Animals know, she murmured. They always do. Don't let them make you doubt what you see. Jessica stood, her mind whirling with fear and determination. She tucked the journal beneath her coat, helped Joanna back into her rocking chair and promised, I'll find Clara, I swear. As she left, Maple followed her out, ears pricked and steps careful, the mare's presence both protection and promise. Jessica walked back through the barn, the journal heavy in her pocket, the weight of Joanna's story settling in her chest. The secrets of Willow Creek were darker than she'd imagined, but now she held the first true key. Out in the darkness, the wind picked up, rustling the trees, sending a shiver down her spine. But Jessica felt something new rising inside her, resolve, and the hope that, for the first time, she wasn't alone. The next 2 days dragged on like an unending storm. Jessica carried Joanna's journal everywhere she went, tucked deep in her bag beneath layers of nursing forms and old receipts. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she dreamed of locked doors and muffled cries, of Maple running frantic through endless, rain-soaked corridors. By day, Jessica moved through Willow Creek on autopilot, alert for the smallest change, a glance, a whisper, a shadow where it shouldn't be. She knew she was being watched. Sometimes she caught Mr. Green's eyes following her across the cafeteria, his smile as sharp as broken glass. Other times it was a sudden hush among the nurses when she entered the staff lounge, or a locked closet door that hadn't been locked before. But she kept her head down and waited, rereading Joanna's coded entries late at night. Sometimes she thought she could feel Joanna's fear bleeding through the pages, the desperate hope that someone someday would listen and act. Now that burden had fallen to Jessica, and she would not look away. On the third night, with the wind rattling the magnolia branches and rain streaking the windows, Jessica made her decision. She would find Clara Evans. She would see for herself what secrets the East Wing tried so hard to hide. It was well past midnight when she crept from her room, dressed in black from head to toe, her heart hammering so loud she was sure it would wake every patient in the building. She kept to the shadows, ducking into alcoves when she heard voices or the distant beep of a monitoring machine. Maple was waiting in the small side yard, just outside the emergency exit, her dark shape barely visible, her breath misting in the cool night air. Jessica pressed her hand to the horse's muzzle, drawing strength from the animal's steady calm. "Wish me luck," she whispered, and slipped inside. The east wing felt different at night. The usual hum of air conditioning was replaced by a low, oppressive silence, punctuated by the rhythmic clicking of a security camera as it rotated back and forth. Jessica pressed herself flat against the wall, waited for the beam of the hallway light to swing away, then darted past. Her palms were slick with sweat, her breaths shallow. She moved like a shadow herself, one step, then another, following the echoes of Maple's soft wickers from outside, the sound a lifeline through the dark. She passed a row of locked doors, each labeled with a number and a patient's name written in faded ink. At the end of the hallway, behind a fire door marked staff only, Jessica found a keypad lock. Her stomach dropped, but then she remembered the coded numbers from Joanna's journal, sequences that had repeated, always at the margin of each entry. With trembling fingers, Jessica entered the numbers, 2741. The lock clicked. She exhaled, almost laughing with relief, and slipped through. The room beyond was stark and cold, furnished only with a hospital bed and a metal chair. In the bed, strapped down by thick restraints, lay a woman. Her wrists were bruised, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Jessica's heart twisted. She stepped closer and read the file clipped to the foot of the bed. Clara Evans, patient X, age 34, no visitors allowed. Jessica felt her anger spike. "Clara," she whispered. The woman didn't answer at first, just stared past Jessica at something only she could see. But when Jessica took her hand, Clara's eyes flickered. Recognition, then fear, then desperate hope. Jessica squeezed her hand, fighting back tears. Before she could say more, the alarm blared, shrill, echoing down the hall. Red lights flashed. Footsteps thundered in the corridor outside. Jessica whirled, heart in her throat. Maple's whinny cut through the chaos, loud and urgent, followed by the crash of hooves against the emergency exit. For a split second, time slowed. Jessica saw Maple blocking a security guard in the doorway, the big mare standing tall, her presence buying precious seconds. Jessica leaned close to Clara. "I'll come back for you, I promise. Hold on just a little longer." She squeezed Clara's hand, then ducked low, racing for the exit. Maple whickered, guiding her with frantic sounds. She slipped past the startled guard, through the side door and into the wet night. Rain soaked her face as she sprinted across the lawn. Maple ran beside her, her massive body between Jessica and the building. The alarm still shrieked, and spotlights swept the grounds. Jessica and Maple ducked behind a hedge, breathless, hearts pounding in unison. She could still feel the imprint of Clara's cold fingers in her palm. They waited there, pressed close together, until the noise faded and the night quieted again. Jessica wrapped her arms around Maple's neck, tears running down her face, not sure if they were from terror or gratitude, or both. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Back in her apartment, Jessica wrote everything down. The alarms, the restraints, Clara's bruised wrists, Maple's heroism. She knew she'd barely escaped, but she also knew the truth was closer now, almost within reach. She clutched the journal and stared at the rain, knowing that tomorrow she would find a way back. She owed that much to Clara, to Joanna, and to Maple, her quiet guardian in the storm. Jessica's world narrowed to a point after that night. Work, whispers, the relentless ache of not knowing what might happen next. She carried Joanna's journal everywhere, its pages now covered with her own frantic notes, arrows, and circled words. Sleep was a fading memory. She kept reliving the sight of Clara's bruised wrists, the terror in her eyes, the echo of Maple's hooves saving her from the security guard. Every small sound startled Jessica. She started locking her apartment door, then stacking a chair beneath the knob, just in case. She needed help, and she knew it. She couldn't do this alone. Not with Mr. Green's gaze shadowing her every step. Not with the staff growing colder each day. So she reached out to the only people she trusted. Her younger brother, Tyler, and Faith Reynolds, a former patient advocate she'd met during her early days at Willow Creek. Tyler was skeptical at first. He was a programmer in Atlanta, used to logic and hard evidence, not haunted horses or secret codes. But when Jessica showed him the journal, his attitude shifted. They sat at Jessica's small kitchen table, the journal spread between them. Tyler's laptop glowed with lines of code as he cross-referenced the strange numbers and symbols Joanna had scrawled in the margins. Faith joined them an hour later, eyes wary but determined, scars peeking from the sleeves of her cardigan, a reminder of her own battles within the system. Together, they formed an uneasy alliance. Jessica's determination, Tyler's technical skill, Faith's hard-earned wisdom. "You really think there's something down there?" Tyler asked, scrolling through floor plans he'd managed to pull from old city records. "A hidden tunnel?" Jessica nodded, tapping the journal. Joanna kept mentioning the hollow below. "There are coordinates and... Look, this entry. Files beneath the willow roots. Records the light can't touch. That's not just poetry. That's a clue." Faith scanned the pages, her brow furrowed. Willow Creek was built in the 1950s, right? Back then, a lot of these places had bomb shelters. If Myers wanted to hide something, he'd use what was already there. Tyler finished, nodding. For the next hour, they pored over maps and Joanna's coded diary. The pieces began to fit. A small storm door near the barn, a set of maintenance tunnels that connected the therapy stable to a forgotten sub-basement under the east wing. There, according to Joanna's notes, the Willow Project files were kept. Patient records, experimental protocols, everything. Jessica felt a new surge of hope, tempered by fear. "Clara is scheduled for a transfer," she said, voice shaking. "That's code for moving her into the drug trials. She might not survive this one. We have to get those files and get her out." Faith reached across the table, squeezing Jessica's hand. "We will. But you can't do this alone." A sudden wave of emotion hit Jessica. She had spent years afraid to trust others, haunted by the memory of her last hospital job, where she'd spoken up for a patient and lost everything. She had learned to keep her head down, to carry secrets in silence. Now, staring at Tyler and Faith, she realized that courage wasn't about going it alone. It was about letting the right people in. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. Maple nickered outside her window, as if in approval. That evening, the three of them met in the barn under the pretense of therapy rounds. Tyler pointed out the old storm door behind a pile of hay bales. Jessica brushed the dust away, revealing a heavy iron latch, long rusted but still solid. The key from Joanna's toy horse slipped in perfectly, turning with a click that echoed in the darkness. The door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase plunging into shadow. "No turning back," Tyler said, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. They descended slowly, their flashlights slicing through decades of dust. The air was thick and musty, heavy with the memory of things left hidden. Jessica's heart hammered as she led the way, Faith behind her, Tyler bringing up the rear. At the bottom, the tunnel branched, one side sealed by a rusted metal gate, the other disappearing into blackness. Jessica found an old directory tacked to the wall: laundry, utility, archives. Archives, Faith said, pointing. That's where the files will be. They squeezed through the narrow corridor, hands brushing damp brick. At the end, a battered steel door stood ajar. Inside, row after row of old filing cabinets lined the walls. Jessica's flashlight illuminated boxes marked Willow Project, Subject Records. She opened the first drawer and froze. Inside were files, dozens of them, labeled with patient names she recognized. Clara Evans, Joanna Brooks. Even Faith's name was there. Tyler snapped photos of everything: files, forms, medication logs. Faith scanned the documents for evidence of illegal trials, forced drugging, isolation protocols. Jessica's hands shook as she read, horror mounting with every page. It was all there, proof of what had happened, and what was still happening. Suddenly, Tyler's phone vibrated. He checked it, eyes wide. Security just rerouted. Someone's coming down here. Jessica stuffed files into her bag. We have to go now. They bolted back down the corridor, up the narrow stairs, and slipped out into the cool night air, hearts pounding, lungs burning. Maple was waiting by the barn, ears pricked, as if she had known they would need her strength. That night, Jessica lay awake, the evidence heavy in her hands. She had proof, she had allies, and for the first time since she arrived at Willow Creek, she believed they had a chance, not just to save Clara, but to expose the truth and bring down those who had hidden in the shadows for far too long. But as she drifted toward uneasy sleep, a single thought echoed in her mind. Time was running out. The air inside Willow Creek felt electric. Every shadow seemed deeper, every whisper sharper. Jessica could feel the clock ticking in her chest. Time was running out for Clara. And with the files now in their possession, the trio had what they needed to act. There would be no more waiting. That night, as rain spattered the windows and the wind whipped branches against the siding, Jessica, Tyler, and Faith set their plan in motion. They met in Jessica's cramped apartment above the admin wing, the evidence spread across her bed in a mess of photos and copied files. Tyler had already sent encrypted backups to a lawyer friend in Atlanta and a reporter in Savannah, just in case. Still, the stakes felt terrifyingly real. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. But there was no choice. Clara's transfer was set for the following night. After that, she'd vanish, just as Joanna had nearly disappeared before her. Faith's fingers drummed anxiously against her mug. "We'll only get one shot at this," she said, her eyes dark with worry. "Are you sure Maple's up for it? This is a lot, even for a horse." Jessica glanced out the window at the barn, where Maple stood silhouetted in the stormlight, head high, ears pricked. "She's braver than all of us. I trust her. Besides, she knows something's wrong. She's been trying to tell us for days." They reviewed the plan one last time. Tyler would trigger a false fire alarm in the main wing, drawing most of the night staff and security away. Faith would wait near the east wing, disguised in scrubs, ready to unlock Clara's door with the keys she'd borrowed from Mr. Green's office. Jessica's role was the most dangerous. She would guide Clara out, using the hidden tunnel they'd discovered beneath the barn. Maple's job, meanwhile, was simple but critical: create a diversion in the garden, drawing the attention of anyone still watching the exits. As midnight approached, the storm intensified, thunder booming overhead. The building itself seemed to tense, as if holding its breath. Tyler slipped out first, heading for the server closet with a duffel bag full of tools. Faith followed, hugging the shadows, her steps quick and silent. Jessica waited until the clock struck 1, then pulled on her black raincoat and slipped out into the night. Maple was waiting at the garden gate, muscles quivering with energy, eyes shining with anticipation. Jessica stroked her neck, feeling the power coiled beneath the mare's skin. "You ready, girl?" Maple snorted, tossing her mane, stamping once as if to say, "Let's do this." The first phase went exactly as planned. At 1:11 a.m., alarms blared through the halls, red lights strobing, sirens wailing. Residents grumbled and nurses rushed about, hustling everyone to the central lounge. Outside, Maple charged into the main courtyard, galloping in wide, frantic circles. She reared and neighed, hooves flashing in the floodlights. Guards and staff ran to intercept her, shouting and waving, but Maple was always just out of reach, turning, darting, drawing them farther and farther from the east wing. Jessica's heart hammered as she slipped down the side hallway, badge swiped and head down. In the confusion, no one noticed her. Faith met her at the east wing stairwell, face pale but determined. "Go, I've got the cameras," Faith whispered. She'd managed to loop the security feeds with Tyler's help, at least for a few precious minutes. Jessica unlocked Clara's door. Inside, Clara was groggy from sedatives but alert enough to know something was happening. Her wrists were bruised but unbound for once, thanks to Faith's earlier intervention. "Clara, it's me. We're getting you out," Jessica whispered. Clara blinked, tears springing to her eyes. "I thought, they said—" She shook her head, swaying. "There's no time. Lean on me. We have to move." Jessica slid an arm around Clara's waist and helped her to her feet. Together they shuffled down the corridor, slipping out the emergency stairwell and into the cold, wet night. In the garden, Maple's frantic galloping grew even wilder. She let out a piercing neigh that echoed across the grounds, a warning and a signal. The security team, already flustered by the chaos inside, chased after her, further away from the escape route. Jessica and Clara made it to the barn, breathless and soaked. Tyler was already there, holding open the storm door to the tunnel. "Go. They're on the north side. Faith's stalling them. But it won't last." Jessica helped Clara down the narrow staircase, her own legs trembling. The tunnel was pitch black, the air thick with dust and fear. Flashlights danced across damp bricks, illuminating their frantic path. Somewhere behind them, the building erupted in angry shouts. Someone must have noticed Clara's empty bed. The group hurried down the twisting corridor, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. Suddenly, a beam of light flickered at the tunnel's far end. Guards searching. Jessica's heart nearly stopped. Then, impossibly, Maple's whinny rang out above them, echoing through the tunnel, a lifeline. Tyler pushed open a maintenance hatch they hadn't noticed before, and with a shove, the group spilled out into the field beyond Willow Creek's fence. There, in the pre-dawn gloom, stood Maple waiting, as if she'd known exactly where to be all along. Jessica collapsed against the mare's side, tears hot on her cheeks. Clara clung to her, sobbing, as Tyler and Faith gasped for breath. In the darkness behind them, the shouts of their pursuers faded. They were free, battered, terrified, but together. As the first light of morning broke over the fields, Maple stood tall above them, eyes fierce, a living symbol of hope and courage. Jessica hugged her tightly, feeling for the first time in weeks that maybe, just maybe, they had a real chance. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Maple nickered softly, lowering her head as if to say, "You're welcome." They had made it out, but Jessica knew the fight was far from over. Ahead lay truth and danger and maybe justice, if they dared to keep going. The sun broke over the horizon in a blaze of gold, spilling across the open fields of Faith's uncle's ranch just outside Savannah. It was a place far removed from the sterile corridors and locked doors of Willow Creek. A world of fresh air and endless green, the scent of dew and summer grass drifting on the wind. For the first time in weeks, Jessica allowed herself to breathe deeply, feeling the tension in her chest loosen ever so slightly. They had made it out. They were safe. But the fear that had haunted her since that first night with Maple in the garden lingered at the edges of her mind. She knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. Faith's uncle, a gruff but kind-hearted man, took them in without questions. Clara spent the first hours curled up in a corner of the guest room, trembling and silent, clutching a blanket as if it were a life raft. Tyler and Faith worked to secure the evidence, scanning and uploading documents, cross-checking files, and sending encrypted packets to journalists, lawyers, and advocates. Jessica barely slept, sitting up beside Clara, holding her hand through the night. Maple wandered the pasture outside, never straying far from the window where Jessica kept watch. The group gathered at dawn in the ranch's kitchen, a heavy quiet between them. The weight of what they'd done and what lay ahead pressed down like a thunderhead. Jessica broke the silence, her voice hoarse but steady. The world needs to know. No more secrets, no more hiding. Faith nodded. "I have contacts at the local paper. They'll listen to me. I'll make sure this gets out." Tyler, eyes red from exhaustion, added, "I've sent everything to backup servers. Even if someone tries to erase it, it's too late." They worked through the morning, Faith on the phone with a trusted reporter, Jessica and Tyler combing through every detail of the files for anything that might be missed. Clara stayed mostly silent, her eyes shadowed, flinching at every unexpected sound. But as the day wore on, a small change began to flicker in her gaze. Hope, fragile but unmistakable. Jessica spent long moments outside with Maple, running her fingers through the mare's mane, resting her forehead against the animal's steady neck. The horse's warmth was grounding, a living heartbeat that calmed Jessica's racing thoughts. "You saved us, girl," Jessica whispered, and Maple snorted in reply, nudging her gently. The quiet between them was a balm, a reminder that loyalty and love could still exist in a world so full of pain. By mid-afternoon, the first call came from the newspaper. Faith stepped outside to speak privately, her face pinched with tension. When she returned, her eyes were shining with a mix of fear and relief. "They're running it," she said. "Tonight, the story's going public." Jessica felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. "We did it. But it's not over. They'll come looking for us." As if in answer, a car crunched up the gravel drive. Jessica's heart leapt to her throat, but Faith's uncle, ever calm, glanced outside, then nodded. "Just the delivery guy, papers and groceries." The day passed in a blur of anxious anticipation. Jessica dozed on the sofa beside Clara, jerking awake every time a car passed on the distant road. When the sun dipped low, Faith's uncle called them for supper. Fried chicken, sweet corn, and cornbread, eaten mostly in silence. It was only after dark that the threat arrived. Jessica stood by the barn with Maple, breathing in the scent of hay and warm horse, when she heard a distant engine idling where no car should be. Her muscles tensed, instinct warning her before her mind could catch up. Maple's ears pricked, then flattened, her body going rigid. A second later, Footsteps crunched in the gravel. Shadows moved near the edge of the field. Two men in dark clothes moving quickly and quietly toward the house. Jessica's blood ran cold. "Faith! Tyler!" she called, heart hammering. Inside, lights flicked on. Faith's uncle grabbed a shotgun, but Jessica barely heard him over the pounding of her own pulse. Maple let out a shrill, piercing neigh, a sound of alarm so loud it echoed across the ranch. The men froze, startled. One raised something. Maybe a flashlight. Maybe something worse. Maple charged, hooves thundering, placing herself between Jessica and the strangers. The men hesitated, then bolted back toward their car, startled by the unexpected fury of a horse defending her own. Within moments, they were gone, tires squealing as their car tore down the drive. Jessica's legs went weak. She dropped to her knees in the grass, Maple nuzzling her face as she tried to catch her breath. Faith and Tyler rushed out, Faith clutching her phone, already dialing 911. "Are you hurt?" Faith demanded, pulling Jessica to her feet. Jessica shook her head, tears mixing with laughter. "Maple saved us again." She knew. She always knows. Later, after police had come and gone, writing up a report, promising to keep watch, Jessica found herself back at Maple's side, stroking the horse's velvety nose beneath the stars. For the first time, real hope took root in her chest. The story was out. The world would know. Clara had agreed to testify. Other patients' families were coming forward. Dr. Myers and his associates were on the run, but their secrets were exposed. The fight was far from over, but for the first time Jessica believed they might actually win. She pressed her face into Maple's mane, whispering her thanks again and again. The mare's steady heartbeat was a song of comfort, a living promise that even in the darkest night, there was strength, loyalty, and a path forward for those who refused to be silent. Savannah City Hall was a far cry from the hush and shadows of Willow Creek. That morning, the steps were crowded with reporters, advocates, and families holding hand-painted signs. The story had exploded across the news, fueled by Faith's brave testimony, the leaked files, and Jessica's sleepless work. Yet inside the marble corridors, a tense hush settled over the inquiry room, broken only by the occasional clatter of camera shutters and the nervous cough of an official. Jessica stood in the hallway, fidgeting with the cuffs of her blazer, eyes scanning the room beyond. Maple was waiting outside, quietly grazing in the city's small memorial garden, allowed in by special permit for the day. The animal's presence calmed Jessica. Every so often, a child or a city worker would approach, offering Maple a gentle pat and a handful of clover, as if drawn by her quiet dignity. Inside, Clara sat beside Faith and Tyler in the front row, hands clasped tightly together. Joanna, frail but unmistakably present, had insisted on attending, her presence a living testimony to the secrets that had festered for years. Jessica caught Joanna's eye and received a small, fierce nod, as if to say, "You can do this. We're all with you." The inquiry panel, a row of officials and investigators, called Jessica's name. As she approached the microphone, her heart hammered in her chest, but she steadied herself with a deep breath, recalling Maple's calm. This was the moment she'd fought for. The moment when the stories that had been buried would be heard. Jessica's voice was clear as she spoke. She described, in careful detail, the abuses and deceptions she'd witnessed at Willow Creek, the mysterious transfers, the locked doors, the experimental treatments disguised as therapy, the silencing of those who spoke up. She spoke not only for herself, but for every patient who'd suffered, her words carrying the weight of Joanna's pain, of Clara's terror, of Faith's scars. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where she could just see Maple's silhouette. "I wouldn't be here without Maple," she said, her voice trembling. She was more than a therapy horse. She sensed what we could not. She kept us safe when we doubted ourselves. Animals have a way of knowing when something is wrong, when someone is suffering. Sometimes they're the only ones who listen when everyone else looks away. A murmur rippled through the room. The officials shifted in their seats. Jessica continued, her words gaining strength. "Silence breeds injustice, but courage multiplies when it's shared." I was scared. We all were. But Maple wouldn't let me turn away, and neither would the people who trusted me with their stories. If you want to fix what's broken, you have to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. The panel began their questions. They asked about the files, the codes, the tunnels, each answer laying bare the years of cruelty hidden behind Willow Creek's quiet facade. Tyler provided technical evidence. Faith testified to the culture of fear and secrecy, and Joanna, voice shaking but steady, recounted her lost years and the moment she nearly disappeared forever. As Jessica listened to them, she realized how much they had all changed. Tyler was no longer just her cautious brother. He was an advocate, his anger channeled into purpose. Faith, once reluctant to trust, spoke with fire. Even Joanna's presence, her willingness to stand before the world, was an act of rebellion against the silence that had nearly swallowed her. When Clara finally spoke, her words were soft but resolute. "I was afraid every day. I thought I'd never be free. But Jessica and Maple, they didn't give up on me. For the first time, I believe there's hope, not just for me, but for all of us." The hearing lasted for hours. More survivors came forward, their stories echoing across the chamber. Stories of lost years, stolen dignity, and moments of kindness that had kept them alive. Dr. Myers, summoned to testify, could no longer hide. His lies unraveled under questioning, his associates exposed as the details spilled out in the glare of public scrutiny. As the sun slanted through the high windows, Jessica felt a deep, tired pride settle in her chest. It was not just justice for Clara or Joanna, or even for herself. It was justice for everyone who had been voiceless. She found herself thinking about the generations of pain carried by those who depended on others for care. The elderly, the ill, the forgotten. But she also saw hope. The way survivors supported each other. The way families and advocates rallied. The way a single act of courage, hers, Maple's, or anyone's, could spark a movement. In a final statement, Jessica addressed the crowd, her voice carrying to the very back of the hall. "Real change doesn't come from one person alone. It comes from all of us, refusing to look away, even if we're scared, even if we're alone at first. Listening is an act of courage, and sometimes the strongest voices belong to those who can't speak for themselves." As applause filled the room, Jessica caught Maple's gaze through the window, the mare's eyes wise and steady. She realized how much she owed to this animal, not just for saving lives, but for teaching her the value of empathy, persistence, and listening when others would not. Outside, as the inquiry ended, families embraced, reporters crowded in for statements, and survivors stood together, no longer alone, no longer silent. Jessica found herself surrounded by friends, old and new, her journey with Maple now the beginning of a new chapter for them all. But in her heart, Jessica knew this was only the start. True healing would take time, but for the first time, she believed that their courage would echo, not just through the halls of Willow Creek, but through every institution where silence had once ruled. A few months later, Willow Creek Assisted Living was shuttered for good. Its faded sign was taken down, the doors sealed, and its empty rooms left to echo with the ghosts of secrets and sorrow. In its place, the land was set aside for something new, a project that would honor not just the survivors, but the courage of those who had dared to stand against the silence. On a sunlit afternoon, the ranch outside Savannah was alive with laughter and movement. Survivors, families, advocates, and local officials gathered for a picnic on the broad lawns. Tables were spread with homemade pies, fried chicken, and pitchers of lemonade. Children played tag between the horse paddocks. Dogs barked, chasing after sticks. It was a celebration not just of justice, but of a new beginning, a chance for those who had suffered to gather, remember, and look ahead. Jessica stood with Maple at the edge of the gathering, watching as people mingled and hugged, as old friends reunited and new bonds were formed. She'd never imagined such a day would come when she first stepped into Willow Creek's garden with a nervous heart and a lead rope in hand. The journey had been long, sometimes almost unbearable, but now, with the sun warm on her face and the sound of Maple's gentle breathing beside her, Jessica felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Maple had become something of a local legend. The Humane Society honored the mare that afternoon with a wreath of wildflowers, placing it around her strong neck as children took turns feeding her apples and braiding her mane. Maple stood tall, dignified, accepting the attention with a calm that only she could command. Her eyes, still bright and knowing, watched the crowd as if understanding the meaning of the day. Jessica accepted a small plaque from the mayor, honoring her as a whistleblower and an advocate for the vulnerable. She blushed at the applause but held Maple's halter, drawing strength from the mayor's presence. "This is for all of us," she said quietly to those nearest her. "For everyone who spoke up, for everyone who listened." Clara approached then, her steps confident, so different from the trembling woman Jessica had first met in that cold, locked room. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she hugged Jessica, her voice thick with gratitude. "You gave me my life back. You and Maple. I don't know how to thank you." Jessica hugged her tightly. "You don't have to. Just live well. That's enough." Joanna, now stronger with every week, placed the wildflower wreath on Maple's neck, her hands steady. "You gave us hope," she said. "You taught us that even when the world tries to silence us, there's always someone listening, even if it's just a horse in a garden." The gathering grew quieter as Faith led a moment of reflection. She spoke about justice, how imperfect and slow it often is, how it can feel like a distant dream for those caught in the system. "But justice begins," Faith said, "when one person notices what others ignore and refuses to look away. Sometimes that person is you. Sometimes it's the person beside you. Sometimes it's the animal at your side." Jessica listened, letting the words wash over her. She thought about her first days at Willow Creek, how unsure she'd felt, how easily she could have walked away. She remembered the fear, the helplessness, the temptation to keep her head down and let someone else deal with the darkness. But Maple had shown her another way. The mayor had refused to pass the haunted doorway, had insisted that something was wrong. Maple had listened, and in listening, had changed everything. The ranch was reopening as a sanctuary, a place for therapy, recovery, and learning. Survivors were invited to work with horses, with dogs, even with the small herd of goats that Faith's uncle had rescued. Jessica would stay on as program director, helping others find strength in the simple acts of caring, of listening, of refusing to let pain go unnoticed. Maple, once a therapy horse with a troubled past, would now live out her days surrounded by green fields and gentle hands, a living symbol of empathy and loyalty. In a quiet moment, as the sun set, Jessica found herself alone with Maple, the crowd's laughter drifting across the lawn. She stroked the mare's neck, her thoughts full of everything they had been through, every terror-filled night, every small victory, every lesson hard won. "Justice is never perfect," she whispered, "but it begins with one person daring to notice, to care. You taught me that, Maple. You changed my life." The story of Willow Creek made headlines for weeks, sparking investigations across the state. Families came forward, demanding reforms. New laws were proposed, and advocacy groups grew in number and strength. Jessica testified before state lawmakers, her voice steady, backed by survivors who refused to fade quietly into the past. And always, at her side, was Maple, the horse who had saved more lives than anyone would ever know. As the stars began to prick the twilight, Jessica gathered the survivors and their families for one last circle around Maple. She looked at each face, the healed, the healing, the still hurting, and saw in them the echo of her own journey. She knew their courage would ripple outward, reaching places she'd never see. At the end of the day, as cameras flashed and friends embraced, Jessica looked into the lens and spoke, her words carrying across airwaves and hearts. "If you see something wrong, speak up. Listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. And remember, sometimes the strongest voices belong to those who can't speak for themselves." Maple lowered her head, the wreath of wildflowers bright against her chest. Jessica felt hope bloom inside her, a hope that real change might come slowly, but that every act of courage, every refusal to look away, would echo onward, transforming not just broken institutions, but every person and animal brave enough to stand against silence. And as dusk settled on the ranch, laughter and music rising toward the stars, Jessica knew their story was far from over. It was only the beginning of a legacy built on listening, compassion, and the quiet, unstoppable strength of one voice, human or horse, daring to speak the truth.